Shocking. She walked into Windsor uninvited, stood before the new queen and refused to bow, calling her a pretender in front of the entire royal court. What followed was a moment that silenced the monarchy, a guard who broke centuries of protocol to protect the crown's dignity. What he said next changed royal history forever. Stay till the end, smash like, and subscribe for more unbelievable royal truths. The rain held off just long enough to feel symbolic. The clouds loomed like watchful spectators above Windsor's ancient towers, heavy with silence that seemed to stretch from the crown itself. Inside the grand ceremonial hall, everything glimmered under candlelight. Banners of deep blue silk, the royal crest embroidered in gold, the portraits of monarchs who had ruled before watching from their frames like ghosts of order. It was a day meant for transition, a moment of grace. A formal acknowledgement of Queen Catherine as the new consort beside the king. Every detail was rehearsed, measured, and timed. Every step had meaning. The crown did not tolerate accidents, but the moment the doors opened and Camilla entered unannounced, that balance trembled. She was not on the guest list. No one had spoken her name since the succession had been sealed. And yet, she walked in with the assurance of someone who still believed the room belonged to her. Her heels echoed on the marble floor as heads turned, courtiers, ministers, guards, all frozen in the uneasy stillness that only power could summon. Sergeant Alaric Dean stood near the East Gallery post, his polished boots unmoving, his eyes fixed ahead. 11 years of service had taught him restraint, but his pulse quickened now. He had seen royal defiance before, but never like this. Queen Catherine, newly crowned yet calm in bearing, stood near the dais. She did not flinch. When Camilla reached the base of the steps, all protocol dictated that she curtsy, a simple gesture, centuries old, symbolic of acceptance. But she did not bend. Instead, Camilla raised her chin and said 6 words that cut through the hall like the echo of a closing door. "I bow to no pretender, Catherine." The room gasped. The king's private secretary, standing behind the throne, went pale. Courtiers whispered in sharp breaths. Catherine's expression remained composed, her hands still clasped at her waist. But her eyes flickered once, not with anger, but with sorrow. Alaric felt the silence tighten, the kind that stretches before history decides what it will remember. Every guard knew the rule, never interfere in royal confrontation. Yet something in that moment broke the invisible line between duty and conscience. The disrespect was not just to a person. It was to the institution itself. Then Catherine did something unexpected. She stepped forward. "This hall," she said softly, "is not mine. It belongs to the crown, to those who served it before me, and those who will guard it after. You dishonor them by denying what they preserved." Camilla's eyes flashed. "I built this child. Do not lecture me about service. I was queen long before you ever touched that throne." The murmurs rose, rippling through the gathered guests like an incoming tide. The king's private guards looked uneasy, shifting their weight, unsure whether to intervene. The master of ceremonies took 1 step forward, then froze when Camilla's glare fell upon him. That was when Sergeant Alaric Dean moved. He stepped from his post, slow, deliberate, the polished floor reflecting his tall, dark figure as if the castle itself watched him. The hall fell silent again. Every sound, the creak of banners, the soft hiss of rain outside, seemed to fade as he stopped between both women. "Ma'am," he said to Camilla, voice calm but firm. "The crown commands respect, not possession. This moment belongs to the nation." "Please stand aside," gasps rippled through the audience. No one spoke that way to a former queen. Camilla's eyes narrowed, disbelief flashing across her face. "You will address me properly, Sergeant. I am still the Queen Consort in spirit if not in title." Alaric's gaze held hers. "With respect, ma'am, the spirit of the crown lives only where duty is honored, not where pride remains." She took a step closer, her voice a whisper edged with venom. "Do you know what it means to speak against me? You are risking your post, your future, your name." He did not flinch. "Names fade, ma'am. Honor does not." The hall seemed to hold its breath. Queen Catherine remained still, her expression unreadable. For a long, electric moment, it felt as if time had stopped, as though the walls themselves were listening. Then Camilla exhaled sharply, turned on her heel, and began to walk toward the exit. The guards by the doors hesitated, unsure whether to open them. Alaric followed, his boots echoing behind her as he escorted her out. Not forcibly, not with aggression, but with the firm, silent authority of someone who had just redrawn the boundary between reverence and rebellion. As the doors closed behind them, whispers erupted like sparks in the wake of thunder. Catherine stood motionless, then finally looked toward Alaric's vacant post. A small, grateful smile touched her lips, not for power reclaimed, but for dignity preserved. Outside, the wind picked up, sweeping across the stone courtyard where Alaric and Camilla now stood alone beneath a gray sky. Rain began to fall again, light at first, then heavier. Camilla turned, her voice trembling with fury and disbelief. "You will regret this." Alaric's reply was steady, almost gentle. "Perhaps, but I will never regret serving the truth." As she walked away into the rain, the thunder rolled above them, as if the heavens themselves had chosen sides. That day, Sergeant Alaric Dean did not just protect the Queen, he protected the crown's soul. The following morning at Windsor was one of those rare, eerie dawns when even the birds seemed to hesitate before singing. Rain had cleansed the courtyards, leaving the cobblestones slick and shining beneath a pale sun. But inside the royal corridors, the air was thick with unease. Word of what had happened in the grand hall spread like fire in silk, quiet, fast, and devastating. By sunrise, every royal aide, every guard, every whispering attendant knew the story. Sergeant Alaric Dean had escorted the former Queen Consort from the ceremony. To some it was scandal, to others it was salvation, but to the palace power brokers it was chaos. In the guard command chamber, Captain Horace Alden stood waiting as Alaric entered. The man's eyes, sharp and lined with exhaustion, gave away nothing. "Sergeant Dean," he said evenly, "do you understand the scale of what you have done?" Alaric stood at attention. "Yes, sir. I follow duty. Duty," Alden repeated softly, tapping the desk. "You publicly challenged a royal figure in front of the Crown, foreign dignitaries, and the Church of England. The palace board is in turmoil. Her Majesty Catherine has not issued a statement. His Majesty is furious." Alaric did not move. "Then I will answer for my actions, Captain." The captain sighed. "There will be a hearing." "Likely suspension." "Understood." Alden hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Between us, Dean, many believe you saved the monarchy from humiliation yesterday. But pride runs deep in these walls. Do not mistake silence for forgiveness." When Alaric stepped out of the chamber, the palace felt heavier than before. Servants paused when he passed. Guards gave him curt nods, some respectful, others wary. To them, he had crossed an invisible line, one few ever dared to touch. By midday, a royal courier arrived with a sealed summons. The wax bore the king's crest. Inside, a single line. "Report to the private council chamber at 7. The weight of those words lingered with him all day. 7 o'clock was never used for formal meetings. It was a time reserved for matters too delicate to appear on any record. That evening, the council chamber glowed with muted firelight. The king sat at the head of the table, his expression grim but restrained. Queen Catherine was seated beside him, silent, her hands folded in her lap. Across from them, the royal advisor, Lord Wrexham, and a half-dozen senior ministers watched as Alaric entered. The king's voice carried the quiet authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Sergeant Dean," he began, "your service has been honorable, your record without fault. But yesterday you broke ceremonial protocol of the highest order." "Explain yourself." Alaric stepped forward. His boots clicked against the marble floor, the sound echoing like a heartbeat. "Your Majesty, my duty has always been to the crown, not the individual. The moment the crown was disrespected, I acted as my oath required." Lord Wrexham leaned forward. "You mean you acted on your own interpretation of that oath?" "A guard does not decide what dishonor looks like. That is the monarch's judgment." Alaric met his gaze steadily. "With respect, my lord, the crown cannot defend itself if those who serve it remain silent when reverence is mocked." The king exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing. "You speak boldly for a soldier." "I speak honestly for one," Alaric replied. The chamber fell silent. Firelight flickered across Catherine's face as she finally lifted her eyes to meet his. "You have been spoken of all morning," she said softly. "Some call you reckless, others call you brave. But tell me, Sergeant, when you stepped forward yesterday, did you fear what would follow?" Alaric's answer came after a pause. "I feared dishonoring my oath more than I feared consequence." Something changed in her expression, a flicker of emotion too fleeting to name. The king noticed it and said nothing. He leaned back, his tone neutral but heavy. "You will remain on restricted duty until this matter settles. The council will deliberate on further action." "Yes, Your Majesty." As he turned to leave, Catherine's voice stopped him. "Sergeant Dean," he turned back. Her gaze held both strength and gratitude. "You may have protected more than you realize." Outside the chamber, the corridor was empty except for one figure waiting in the shadows. Lady Rosamond, the Queen's private secretary. She approached quietly, her voice low. "The former Queen Consort has not left Windsor. She has been making inquiries about you. There is talk of influence, of her allies pressing for your dismissal." Alaric's expression remained still. "I expected as much." "She feels humiliated," Rosamond said. "People like her never forgive humiliation," he nodded once. "Then I will stand where I must until truth decides which of us serves the crown more faithfully." That night, as rain began to fall again, he walked the outer courtyard. The moonlight shimmered on the wet flagstones, and from the far window of a west tower, a silhouette watched him. The former queen herself. Camilla's eyes burned with quiet rage. "He thinks he can undo me," she whispered to her aide. "Let him try. The guard serves power, not purity, and power is still mine." Her aide hesitated. "What will you do, ma'am?" Camilla turned from the window, her voice cold as glass. "I will remind the crown who made these halls tremble long before Catherine ever wore a crown." Inside his quarters, Alaric placed his gloves on the desk and stared out into the storm. He knew the battle had only just begun, and that the next blow would not come from ceremony, but from shadow. The palace never slept, but that night it felt haunted. Whispers moved through Windsor's stone corridors like candle smoke, invisible yet heavy. Somewhere between rumor and revenge, a quiet war had begun. One that did not use soldiers or swords, but words, forged papers, and influence. At the center of it stood two figures who could not have been more different. One believed she still reigned. The other believed loyalty had limits. Camilla sat in her private drawing room near the west wing, the firelight dancing across crystal decanters and framed photographs of a reign she refused to release. Her expression was composed, but her voice trembled with controlled fury. "He embarrassed me before the court," she said. "A guard, a servant, walked me out like a common guest. And now the people call him a hero?" Her aide, a lean man named Miles Trenham, shifted uneasily. "Public sentiment is unpredictable, ma'am. The Queen Consort has not made a statement in his defense either. Silence favors you if we act carefully." Camilla's eyes sharpened. "Carefully is for cowards. I want him gone," Miles hesitated. "The king would never approve a dismissal without cause." "Then we will give him one." Within days, documents began circulating through royal channels, unsigned memoranda, accusations of misconduct, suggestions that Sergeant Alaric Dean had broken not one, but several protocols during his tenure. The rumors claimed he had interfered with ceremonial schedules, argued with superiors, even leaked information to the press during the succession transition. None of it was true, but truth was fragile in the palace, easily bruised by the weight of authority. By the end of the week, the Royal Ethics Board had summoned Alaric for questioning. The meeting room was dim, the walls lined with portraits of generals and guards long dead. At the table sat 3 officials, 2 civilians and 1 military inspector. "Sergeant Dean," the chairman began, "we are reviewing complaints regarding your recent conduct and possible breaches of discretion." "You are aware of the charges?" Alaric stood straight. "I am aware of the lies," the inspector frowned. "Mind your tone, Sergeant." "With respect, sir, I mind my honor first." The chairman's pen paused mid-stroke. "Then perhaps you would like to explain why these documents show inconsistencies in your duty records." Alaric looked down at the papers before him. They bore his name, his signature, yet each mark felt foreign. "These are not mine," he said firmly. "These pages have been altered." The inspector leaned back. "That is a serious accusation." "It is not an accusation," Alaric replied.
"It is fact."
"You are reading forged documents," the chairman sighed. "You understand how dangerous it is to make such a claim against a former Queen Consort's office?" "I understand it is more dangerous to serve power without question," he said. After 2 hours of interrogation, they dismissed him with a warning. Further investigation pending. It meant suspension in everything but name. Outside, the corridors that once echoed with royal footsteps now felt like a labyrinth of eyes. Guards avoided his gaze. Aides whispered as he passed. Yet amidst that cold isolation, one person refused to turn away. Lady Rosamond, the Queen's private secretary, found him near the chapel cloister at dusk. Her umbrella shielded them from the drizzle. "They are moving fast," she whispered. "I have seen the documents. The signatures are falsified but subtle. Whoever did this knows the system well. Camilla's aide, perhaps," Alaric said quietly. Miles Trenham. "He controlled security documentation when she reigned." Rosamond nodded. "Then we need proof, not suspicion." Alaric's eyes darkened. "And where would we find proof against those who hide behind crowns?" She hesitated before speaking again. "Perhaps in the vault." That word carried weight. Beneath Windsor lay the Royal Legacy Archive, a labyrinth of sealed records dating back centuries. Only 3 people held full access: the king, the archivist, and the chief of security. But there was one more key, the ceremonial pass given to the senior Coldstream Guard for state audits. The same key Alaric still carried. At midnight, he descended into the vault. The air was cool and still, scented faintly with old parchment and wax. Rows of shelves stretched endlessly into the dark, each drawer labeled with dates and codes. His lantern threw a thin circle of light over the polished floor as he searched the security section. Then he saw it. A file marked Transition Command, Confidential, Post-Elizabeth II. The seal was broken. Inside, he found the original reports from the Queen's final directives, unedited, untouched. And within them, a letter addressed to the incoming king and his consort. It was signed by the late Queen herself. "To my successor, and the one who shares his crown, remember that crowns are borrowed, not owned. Should pride ever outweigh service, the guard shall act in my stead to preserve dignity. For the crown is not a possession, but a trust." Alaric read it twice, his pulse steady but his chest tight. The letter confirmed what he had always believed. His intervention in the hall had not been defiance, but fulfillment of an oath the late Queen herself had foreseen. He placed the document back carefully, then turned toward the exit. But as he reached the last stairway, a voice emerged from the shadows. "Well, well," Miles Trenham said quietly, stepping into the lantern's glow. "I was told you might come snooping." Alaric's hand went instinctively to his belt, where his badge rested. "You forged those documents," Miles smirked. "Let us call it correction. The monarchy cannot afford heroes who forget their place." "You mean those who refuse to kneel?" Miles's smirk faded. "Careful, Sergeant. You are walking on ground that has buried better men than you. Then let it bury me with truth," Alaric said, brushing past him. As he disappeared into the corridor, Miles whispered into his radio. "He found it. Tell her." In the upper halls, Camilla's reflection shimmered in the glass of the west window. Her voice was quiet but cold. "Then we end him before he ends me." The next sunrise would not bring peace. It would bring exposure, and for the first time, Windsor would learn that the battle for the crown had never been about who wore it, but about who still believed in its meaning. Morning came like a breath held too long. The clouds hung low over Windsor Castle, heavy and grey, their stillness broken only by the sound of tolling bells echoing across the courtyard. What had begun as whispers in the night was now thunder at dawn. Someone, no one knew who, had leaked documents to the press. Not the forgeries, but the originals. By sunrise, every major outlet was ablaze with headlines. The late Queen's hidden letter found, a royal warning from beyond the grave. Crown in crisis, Guard's defiance justified by Elizabeth's final words. It spread like wildfire, unstoppable and precise. The public had seen the Queen's signature, her seal, her unmistakable handwriting. Every word she had written about power, humility, and the duty of those who serve was now public knowledge. In less than an hour, the palace phones would not stop ringing. Advisors barked orders down corridors. Press secretaries scrambled to contain the story. But the truth was faster than their denial. It had escaped the marble walls, and there was no silencing it now. Sergeant Alaric Dean watched it all unfold from the outer gate post, where he had been reassigned pending review. He stood in his uniform, shoulders squared, eyes steady. He did not speak. He did not smile. He simply breathed the cool air of vindication. Captain Alden approached with an expression halfway between disbelief and pride. "You caused a storm, Dean," he said quietly. "The council is in panic. The king has gone silent, and the Queen Consort has lost her shadow," Alaric finished. The captain nodded grimly. "She is furious. Her aide has vanished. They say Miles Trenham fled the castle hours before dawn." "Guilt runs faster than truth," Alaric said softly. Upstairs in the private royal chambers, Camilla stood before the mirror, her reflection pale beneath the morning light. The once composed face that had graced ceremonies now trembled under the weight of public judgment. Her aide's betrayal had become her ruin. The letter she had ordered hidden had become her undoing. Behind her, a maid entered timidly. "Ma'am, the press is waiting for a statement. They are saying the late Queen's letter supports the Guard's actions." Camilla's eyes blazed. "Then tell them they are mistaken. I was Queen by law, but the people are fickle," Camilla snapped. "They worship crowns, not conscience." The maid hesitated before leaving, murmuring, "Perhaps this time, ma'am, it is the other way around." Meanwhile, Queen Catherine had called for a private audience in the king's study. The original document, now authenticated, lay on the oak table between them. She traced the handwriting with her fingertip, her voice low but sure. She saw this coming. Grandmother knew that one day pride would test the limits of loyalty. The king looked weary. She always believed the monarchy could survive scandal, but not arrogance. Catherine turned to him. "Then we must act accordingly. Let truth speak for itself. Let the Guard be reinstated." The king's jaw tightened. "You are aware of the precedent that sets. A soldier correcting a queen. History will not forget it." "Then let history remember it," she said. "It is time we remind the world that crowns do not make integrity. Integrity makes crowns." By mid-afternoon, a public statement was released from Buckingham Palace. The late Queen's letter has been verified as authentic. The Royal Guard's actions at Windsor were found to be consistent with Her Majesty's instructions for the protection of the Crown's dignity. Sergeant Alaric Dean will be reinstated with full honours and appointed to lead the newly established Council of Ethical Service. The announcement shook the kingdom. Crowds gathered outside the palace gates, cheering not for scandal, but for sincerity. They held signs that read, "Loyalty is truth," and "The Guard who stood tall." For the first time in years, the monarchy felt human again. That evening, Alaric was summoned to the Queen's private gallery. Catherine awaited him beside the window overlooking the gardens. The sky was streaked in rose and gold. "You were right, Sergeant," she said quietly. "You served the crown, not the crown-bearer." Alaric bowed. "The late Queen gave me an oath, ma'am. I only kept it." Catherine smiled faintly. "Then keep it still. The crown needs fewer ornaments and more guardians like you." "Thank you, ma'am." As he turned to leave, she added, "The people are calling you the Queen's last sentinel. I suspect that title will follow you longer than any rank." He paused at the doorway. "Titles fade, ma'am, but faith endures." Outside, in the West Wing, Camilla's chambers were being emptied. Her portrait, once hanging beside the king's, had been quietly removed. The carriage that carried her away from Windsor that night made no announcement, no farewell. Her reign ended not with scandal or exile, but with silence, the kind that follows when truth has spoken louder than power ever could. Later, alone by the gates, Alaric looked toward the darkened horizon. The rain had stopped. The moon hung high, silver and still. The bells of Windsor chimed softly in the distance, not in mourning, but in restoration. He whispered to himself, "She thought she was still queen. But the crown only ever belongs to the truth." Spring swept over Windsor like a quiet promise. The sharp winter wind had softened. Flowers returned to the courtyards, and for the first time in years, the castle did not echo with scandal, but with rebuilding. The old portraits had been polished, new charters drafted, and the crown's guards stood taller than before. Yet among all this calm, Sergeant Alaric Dean felt something deeper stirring beneath the peace, a weight that silence often hides. It had been 3 months since his reinstatement. The title he once wore with quiet humility had changed. Chief of Ethical Service, appointed directly by the King and Queen. His duty was to oversee every royal action that touched the public, to ensure truth and transparency guided the crown as much as ceremony. The press adored him, the people celebrated him. But inside the palace, not everyone was celebrating. One evening, as the sunset spilled amber light through the long corridor of mirrors, Captain Alden entered his office with a grim face. "You have admirers, Dean," he said softly, "and you have enemies who wear smiles." Alaric glanced up from his desk. "The former kind I can endure. The latter I must be wary of." Alden nodded. "Rumors again. Some courtiers are whispering that you are becoming too visible, that the Queen's last sentinel is turning into a symbol larger than the throne itself." Alaric gave a faint smile. "Symbols fade, Captain. The truth does not." But even he knew the danger of such talk. Power rarely forgave anything or anyone that drew the public's devotion away from its center. That night, while reviewing archival documents in the royal study, Alaric found a file he had never seen before. Its seal bore an unfamiliar crest, an older symbol, one not used since the reign of George VI. Inside were correspondences between high-ranking ministers and royal staff, dated only weeks before the late Queen's passing. One line caught his eye. "The transition must be managed. Should public sentiment favor the wrong successor, countermeasures will be prepared." The wrong successor. The phrase chilled him. He read further and found references to a project codenamed Operation Veil, an initiative to manipulate public records about the Queen's private instructions. It mentioned 2 names, Miles Trenham and one unnamed senior advisor still in service. He sat back, the firelight flickering against his eyes. Camilla had been the face of the scandal, but she had not acted alone. Someone still inside the palace had orchestrated her defense and her silence. The following morning, Alaric requested a private audience with the Queen. Catherine listened in thoughtful quiet as he showed her the documents. Her expression hardened. "You believe someone loyal to my father remains tied to her network." "I believe loyalty to power dies slower than loyalty to people, ma'am," he replied. She closed the folder. "Then we find them. But we do this quietly. The kingdom cannot survive another open fracture." Over the next week, Alaric began investigating quietly, interviewing clerks and reviewing clearance logs. His instincts led him to the palace communications wing, a marble labyrinth of couriers and coders who handled royal correspondence. There, he noticed a subtle pattern. Classified messages routinely passed through an encrypted terminal still registered under Camilla's administration. When he traced the operator, he discovered a name he had once trusted, Lord Wrexham, the same advisor who had presided over his disciplinary hearing months earlier. Late one evening, Alaric confronted him in the archive hall. Wrexham was reading by candlelight, the soft crackle of the flame reflecting in his silver-rimmed spectacles. "Working late, my lord?" Alaric's voice was quiet, almost conversational. The advisor looked up, his face polite but tense. "Chief Dean, still chasing ghosts, are you?" "Not ghosts," Alaric said evenly. "Just those who prefer the dark." Wrexham's eyes flicked to the folder in Alaric's hand. "Ah, So you have seen it. Operation Veil. Her Majesty's late husband approved that contingency himself. It was meant to protect the institution from inconvenient truths. By rewriting them? By preserving stability, Wrexham countered. Do you think the Crown survives on honesty alone? The people want a story, Sergeant. They do not want reality. Alaric stepped closer. Then the Crown must learn to give them both. The advisor's lips curved into a thin smile. Careful, Dean. You are beginning to sound like a man who believes himself greater than the throne he serves. Alaric's reply was sharp but steady. No, my lord. I believe in a throne that deserves to be served. The two men stood in tense silence, the weight of centuries between them. Wrexham finally spoke again, his tone soft, venom hidden behind grace. You are dangerous, Sergeant. Men like you inspire others, and that makes you unpredictable. Alaric nodded once. Then you should know. I am predictable in one thing only. I never yield to deceit. He turned to leave, but Wrexham's final words followed him like a curse. Be careful what truth you uncover. The Crown has survived longer than any man who tried to clean it. That night, Alaric wrote a private memo to Queen Catherine, enclosing the evidence. He did not call for arrest or exposure, only reform. A full audit of royal correspondence, public transparency of archives, and the removal of political advisors from security oversight. When Catherine read it, she understood. The monarchy would not be cleansed by silencing its enemies, but by removing the shadows where they hid. The following week, a new royal decree was issued. The Crown hereby establishes the Office of Truth and Service, ensuring accountability within all royal functions. Every act of governance shall reflect not only power, but principle. The people called it the Queen's Renewal. For Alaric, it was not victory. It was responsibility, because he knew, for every shadow that truth exposed, another waited to take its place. But as long as he stood guard, that shadow would never grow unchecked again. That evening, as dusk bled into twilight, Queen Catherine passed him in the courtyard. You know, she said softly, my grandmother once told me the Crown's truest defenders are the ones who never seek to wear it. Alaric bowed deeply. Then may I never be fit to wear it, ma'am. And for the first time in generations, Windsor felt honest again, not perfect, not untarnished, but human. The morning sun rose over Windsor like gold poured through the clouds, soft, dignified and unburdened by the shadows that had once clung to its walls. For the first time in decades, the castle breathed freely. Where fear once whispered, reform now echoed. The Crown had changed, not through force or rebellion, but through truth, quietly reclaimed. Sergeant Alaric Dean stood in the courtyard. His reflection mirrored faintly on the polished glass of the Queen's Range Rover, now preserved as part of the Royal Heritage exhibit. His own badge gleamed faintly in the light. Chief of Ethical Service. It was a title born not from ambition but consequence. Months had passed since the Queen's Renewal Act had been declared. Royal procedures were now open to audit. The palace's walls, once veils of secrecy, had grown transparent. Guards were trained not only in protocol but in conscience. Power had learned humility. And yet, as history often proves, change invites resistance. That afternoon, Alaric was summoned to the Queen's private chambers. Catherine awaited him by the window, her hand resting lightly on the sill, the soft hum of a choir drifting in from the chapel below. Sergeant, she began, her voice calm but heavy, you have given this institution more than we ever asked for, perhaps more than we deserved. I have only served as duty required. Ma'am, Alaric replied. She turned, eyes bright with emotion. Duty bends to survival. Integrity does not. You have done more than protect the Crown. You have reminded it why it exists. He inclined his head respectfully, but her tone shifted. But it has come at a cost. You are no longer seen as just a guard. To the people you have become a symbol, a living conscience. And that, Sergeant, makes the Crown uneasy once more. He understood instantly. You wish me to step down? Catherine hesitated. I wish you peace, Alaric. I wish you a life beyond duty. The truth you fought for has taken root. But symbols, if left unchecked, can grow into storms. I cannot let you become another battle between the throne and the people. The words cut, though they were spoken with care. He felt no anger, only the quiet ache of knowing he had fulfilled his purpose too well. Then perhaps, ma'am, he said softly, the guard who once stepped forward should now learn to step back. She looked at him, not as a queen to her subject, but as one soul to another. History will never forget you, Sergeant Dean, but promise me this. Do not let the world turn your service into spectacle. Let it remain what it truly was, love for something greater than yourself. He bowed deeply. I promise, Your Majesty. A week later, the official announcement came. The man once known as the Queen's last sentinel had retired from active royal service. The palace released a brief statement honoring his extraordinary contribution to the restoration of royal integrity. But no ceremony was held. No medals were pinned, just quiet respect. The next morning, Alaric left Windsor without fanfare. He walked alone through the gates he had guarded for more than a decade, the sound of his boots echoing against the old stone. He did not look back. He travelled north, far beyond London's reach, to a small village overlooking the Scottish Highlands, a place the late Queen herself had once loved. There he built a small home on the edge of a meadow where wind and silence became his only companions. Years passed. The world moved on. Kings grew older, queens wiser. Yet sometimes, when dignitaries visited Windsor, they were shown the glass exhibit of the Queen's Range Rover, the same one Alaric had once defended. Beneath it, engraved in silver, read the words, "For the guard who remembered that loyalty without honesty is silence, and silence is not service." And though few remembered his face, everyone knew the story. The guard who stepped forward when others froze. The man who believed the crown belonged not to the powerful, but to the principled. One summer morning, Queen Catherine herself visited his small home unannounced. He greeted her as always, humble, reserved, the same unwavering calm. They sat on the porch overlooking the valley, drinking tea as the sun rose. "You found peace, I see," she said. "I found purpose," he replied. Peace followed, she smiled. "The world still speaks of you, you know," he chuckled. "Then the world should learn to speak of what mattered instead." She looked toward the distant horizon, where the first rays of sunlight struck the castle towers far beyond the hills. "Sometimes I think the monarchy did not save you, Sergeant." "You saved the monarchy," he shook his head. "No, ma'am. Truth did." As she departed, the Queen turned back once more. "If only my grandmother could see the world you helped build." Alaric watched her carriage disappear down the path, then stood quietly in the wind. The grass swayed gently, whispering through the fields like a song too old to forget. He closed his eyes and thought of the Queen who had first believed in him, the one who had written, "The crown is not a possession, but a trust." He smiled faintly and murmured, "The trust is kept, ma'am." And as the day unfolded across the golden hills, it seemed for a moment that the crown itself bowed to the truth, not out of power but out of gratitude. If you believe that courage and integrity still define real royalty, smash that like button, drop a comment about what truth means to you, and subscribe for more inspiring bench flick stories that remind us honor never fades, even when the crown does.